today you have a left liberal academic privileging an alien sociological lenses to study the Indian history and culture. So today you have people who come with postmodernism, feminism, and a whole lot of other alien lenses to look at ourselves and reinterpret everything in the Indian context in these alien ways. They privilege these things when they talk about Indian history and culture. If you have a model-based approach, a good model must accommodate all the evidence coherently with little or no conflict. And I'm saying that in the context of Indian history and culture, we got things like archaeology, genetics, climate records, epigraphy, coins, literature, oral records, foreign traveler accounts, and world timelines, astronomy, sciences, scripts, grammar, language, paleontology, and religion, philosophy. So many things are there, data points are there. And our desire is to find out, can all of these things fit into a model of the Indian civilization with no conflict? So today I'm going to talk on the story of ancient India from the deep south to the north. You might have heard my earlier talks where I focused on several other topics. Now I'd like to go deep into one area which is of great relevance to the identity of the Indian nation itself. So before I start, my humble thanks to all the teachers who have taught us in the past, all the way from our acharyas and our gurus down to our contemporary present day teachers. So today we know that there are 5 forces allied against the narration of Indian history. So right in the very center and the oldest is a colonial narrative, which turns out to be a pretty Hindu-phobic narrative, if you will. And they are surrounded by the Eurocentric narrative, which took over from the colonial narrative. And you have vested interests, that is one more layer around that. Today you have a liberal academic bias that also comes into our narratives, and finally the Marxist bias. So these are the 5 forces that are today acting upon the narration of Indian history. Most of us are not aware of it, but it impacts our identity pervasively. And today when you look at what's happening in India, that there are riots that have been engineered all over the country, you need to sit and ask, so whose country is it? What is our identity as Indians? So these questions become all the more relevant when you take it how we are described in common narrations. So I'm saying that history plus ideology results in a subversion of our true identity. So today if you ask a common Indian, maybe a student from the road, what is your identity as an Indian? They would have no idea. They would not be able to connect to anything in the past. They'd probably say we are some mix of Bollywood and cricket and maybe some Mughalite dishes, and that's about it. That's our identity as Indians. But it's such a corruption and such a ignorant level of where we actually are, and we'll try to address these things. So I've addressed these at length in my previous talks, so I'll quickly go through that. Why was Indian history distorted? Well, the early colonial historians were motivated by a desire to uphold the biblical chronology. Then the linguistic analysis of Indo-European languages led to something called a Proto-Indo-European homeland in Central Asia, and that gave rise to something called the Aryan invasion theory. And as a corollary of that, somebody called Dravidians is assumed to be different people from the Aryans. And the missionary desire was there to convert the southern Indians. Let's not forget where they first landed, in Tamil Nadu and places like that. Then today you have a left liberal academic privileging an alien sociological lenses to study the Indian history and culture. So today you have people who come with postmodernism, feminism, and a whole lot of other alien lenses to look at ourselves and reinterpret everything in the Indian context in these alien ways. They privilege these things when they talk about Indian history and culture. Finally, we also have deep-rooted in the Indian context the Marxist desire to subvert the Indic identity, because they believe change can only come on the back of a revolution, and that's by destroying the old order. The old order in India is the Indic Dharmic civilization. By destroying that, change can come about. So that their deep desires there are underlying all of these things. So I come with a very analytical way of looking at things. So I ask, whenever we do any kind of analysis, we need a model. And you do that every day. Every day when you do any kind of analysis, you probably have a model of where you want to go. You validate that model and try to see, does that model work well? So I say that if you have a model-based approach, a good model must accommodate all the evidence coherently with little or no conflict. And I'm saying that in the context of Indian history and culture, we got things like archaeology, genetics, climate records, epigraphy, coins, literature, oral records, foreign traveler accounts, and world timelines, astronomy, sciences, scripts, grammar, language, paleontology, and religion, philosophy. So many things are there, data points are there. And our desire is to find out, can all of these things fit into a model of the Indian civilization with no conflict? If there is a conflict, we have to understand, why is the conflict? Is the conflict because my model is wrong, my assumptions are wrong, or is the data wrong? Have I measured the data incorrectly? So these are the things that an analytical engineer or somebody else would do in trying to understand the narration of history. So I'm saying a good model can explain the context multidimensionally and be used to predict to fill the gaps. So today we have overwhelmingly the linguistic model to discuss about Indians. And this Proto-Indo-European linguistic model led to a homeland in Central Asia and led to the Aryan invasion or the migration theory in 1500 BC from Central Asia. And as a result of this model, the thinking is that Sanskrit and Hinduism is an import into India from Central Asia, and the Dravidians are separate people. So they're not the same as Aryans. That is the thinking. So if you look at the evidence is made to fit the linguistic model. Some of the things like, for example, genetics. Today, everybody talks about genetics models, and so on. But what we find is, genetics, the evidence is made to fit this because they use constraints from this model in order to talk about genetics itself. There are other evidence also that does not fit the linguistic model, and some of the things I put over here, for example, things like astronomy, archaeology, climate records, oral and literary works. None of these evidence from these areas fit the linguistic model. So we are now asking the question, what is wrong? Is our data over here incorrect? Or is there some problem with this model? Why is it that all the evidence that we have of the Indian civilization cannot coherently be discussed in the context of the models that we are told is correct, right? We are told the linguistic model is correct. So I'd like to now just talk about the 5 forces very briefly. I talked about this in the past also, so I won't go too much into detail. The Indian history narration started with the colonial people, and they started ideological scholarship. And they came, like I said, motivated by a desire to uphold the biblical history. And they believed that God created the world in 4004 BCE, and nothing could have been there prior to that. They also believed God destroyed the world in Noah's flood in 3000 BCE. And because of that, no history can be present from then till the current times. So when these guys came and saw the Puranic chronologies, when they came to India, they asked the Indians, what is your history? They said, we have the Itihasas, we have the Puranas, we got temple epigraphy, all these kind of things. They looked at that and said, whoa, there are huge timelines in the Indian context, and that doesn't fit with the biblical chronology. So they came around saying that there are problems with the Indian chronology and we need to correct it. And in the process of correcting it, they first came about trying to say, where does Indian history fit with the known Western history? So they went and saw that Megasthenes talked about somebody called Sandrakottos, and they tried to see in the Purana king list, who is the closest to this phonetically that we say Sandrakottos. They said Chandragupta Maurya. So they linked up Chandragupta Maurya with Sandrakottos and said, aha, we have an anchor point and we know where Western history is in relation with Indian history. However, the Puranic records, the Chandragupta Maurya is about 1200 years earlier than 300 BCE or so. So they introduced distortions by reducing a huge Puranic chronology into a very short Indian chronology. So people say, is it right? Why would the colonials do that? Is there any proof that the colonials came around with a biblical way of thinking? Well, if you look at what they wrote, William Jones said, either the first 11 chapters of Genesis are true or the whole fabric of our national religion is false. He also said, I'm obliged to believe the sanctity of the venerable books of Genesis. Genesis talks about the creation of man, the world in 7 days, and so on and so forth. Max Muller, he said, I look upon the creation given in Genesis as simply historical. So this is the kind of biblical thinking they came with, and they imposed a young chronology in India. And we are, as a consequence of that, we have Aryan invasion, discrediting of Indic sources, recent linguistic data for works, and so on. One more work that I came across on Max Muller, he wrote a letter to his wife. And that letter was in 1866, published in this account over here, edited by his wife. And he says that the Vedas are the root of the religion. To show them what that root is, I feel sure is the only way of uprooting all that has sprung from it from the last 3,000 years. So very, very clearly in his own words, his works of translating the Vedas and everything else is motivated by a desire to uproot the Indic civilization in favor of a biblical chronology. So it's not just our imagination running wild and so on. There is proof to look at what their thinking was in those days. The colonial way of thinking soon led to a Eurocentric way of looking at Indian history, primarily because the Europeans were interested in knowing what is their homeland. Ever since William Jones came to India and he said there is a commonality between Sanskrit, Latin and Greek, they seem to be related, the Europeans wanted to know where is our homeland. So initially they thought India was the homeland and Sanskrit is the mother of all the languages. Then eventually they discovered the Mitannis and the Hittites who were supposedly Indo-Aryan in the late 1800s. Once they did that, then linguistic models were proposed to try and say that Sanskrit is no longer the mother language. There must have been an even more ancient ancestral language, which they call the Proto-Indo-European language. And because of that, the homeland shifted and they tried to see where it was and finally landed up in Central Asia. And they proposed, because of that, that Aryans came to India in 1500 BC. It's a consequence of these discoveries over here. Then in late 1800s, they discovered the Indus Valley civilization. And in 1900s, when they started excavating the site, they found skeletons there and so on. And very, very soon, one of these guys who excavated there came around saying that Indra stands indicted because Indra is called Purandara, the destroyer of forts. And here you see that there are dead bodies here in the Indus Valley and so on and so forth. And they said that it's supposed to be an invasion from the Proto-Indo-European homeland. And they used linguistics and archaeology to make these claims. Now in 2000s, the invasion has become a migration from the Proto-Indo-European homeland using linguistics, archaeology and genetics as the tools. And we talked about this earlier also, that from Proto-Indo-European language, hypothesized ancestral language, that today the linguistic model says that all of these languages have the root in this particular source. And you can see that from here is Indo-Iranian, and from Indo-Iranian is Iranian Indic, from Indic is Sanskrit and all the northern Indian languages over here. I put this as an example to show you how this theory works. So for Proto-Indo-European reconstruction, the example is the wheel. Archaeologically, we have seen examples of the wheel all over the place. The Vincha culture, for example, in Ukraine, they claim that the oldest wheel has been found in their civilization. It's not a civilization, it's a culture more than a civilization. 3800 BC is when they found that. And we also see that in Harappa from around 2600 BC. And this wheel is a common sight even today in rural India. If you go to rural India, you find the bullock cart that shows these wheels. So any culture that has got the wheel must have got words for the technology of the wheel and the cart. It must have a word for the wheel, for the yoke, for the hub, for the axle, and so on. And so if you look at the old Sanskrit, Latin, Greek, Hittite, Tocharian, you find that for the wheel, the Sanskrit word is chakra, in Latin is rotum, very close to rotate. And in Greek it is kuklos, and Hittite is something else, and so on. For yoke it is yoga, lugam, zugo, jagwa, and so on. And for the hub it is nabya, umbilicus. Axle it is aksa or axis over here. And this is the proposed reconstruction from PIE for the wheel. So the PIE word, wheel, they say is something, I don't even know how to pronounce this, but maybe Kweklo, I don't know. If there's a star in the beginning of the word, that means it's not a real word. It's a reconstructed word, academically reconstructed. So this academically reconstructed word is Kweklo. That gave rise to the Proto-Indo-Iranian word called Kekro, which is also not real. That's a reconstructed word. And that gave rise to the real word called chakra. So here's the irony of what it is. Today, to have got the PIE language, the only data they have is Sanskrit. The only data available to reconstruct the PIE language is Sanskrit. And from Sanskrit, most of these data, they worked backwards and proposed and reconstructed academically the so-called language called Proto-Indo-European. So this is the irony of what we are buying today from the PIE. So the linguistic model, one of the advances was when they found something called the Kenton-Satum classification. So if I ask somebody over here, what do we say is for 100 in Sanskrit? What is the word for 100 in Sanskrit? Shatam, Shatam. So in Latin, that became centum, which is pronounced as centum, but it is centum. So the KH becomes K, the hard K in Greek or the H in Germanic, whereas this is a proposal. This is only a proposal with academicians, and the K becomes Sh in Sanskrit. So Satem is 100 in Avestan, and this one is in Latin. So they assume that the centum languages are all European. However, Tocharian over here, which is there in the northeast of India, literally, and Hittite in Asia, and Satem is assumed to be Asian. However, all the Slavic languages show the Satem like Baltic, Albanic, and so on. So Konrad Elst also shows there's a Proto-Bangani in the Himalayan region that uses Koto for 100, which is also a centum kind of a language. So in other words, even the so-called advance in linguistic that is dividing languages on the basis of the centum and the satem, even that is called into question because it is not a neat division. There seems to be all kinds of problems here. So if one is proposing that migration is what led to the spread of these languages, then it doesn't appear to be a very clean migration. There appears to be all kinds of things happening over here. That's one of the things over here. So today the linguistic analysis has gone into a Eurocentric kind of a mode, two modern languages narratives. One is by Maria Gimbutas and other one Colin Renfro. We talked about this extensively in the past, where we said that today there's a Kurgan or Steppe hypothesis, where in 3 waves with the domestication of the horse, 3500 BC, these people living between Caspian Sea and the Black Sea, Yamnaya culture, they spread it to the east and the west, becoming the corded ware people and the Andronovo people. And by 1500 BC, the Bacteria Margiana archaeological complex, they've entered into India. And by 500 BC, they have settled all over northern India, and you see the appearance of the Dravidian people. We have talked about this in the past, so I won't talk too much about it. So the Aryan invasion theory involves all of these things: a leftist academic, Eurocentric, colonial, vested interest, Marxist. Everybody's got a stake in this narrative. So when so many stakeholders are there, you can imagine how tightly it is held to the chest. It's not going to be easy to uproot this particular one. So it says that bands of male warriors from Central Asia invaded or migrated to India around 1500 BC, replaced the existing civilization, and they brought Sanskrit, Vedic ecosystem, and so on. So the last of these forces is the Marxist ideological offensive, and today the ecosystem in academia is strongly controlled by the Marxists who control the narration and so on, and there's a whole lot of claims that they make, and I don't even want to go into all of these things, but the bottom line is there is distortions, erasures, biases, and errors. That is the representation of the current narrative, and I make this claim because I have reviewed the textbooks that is used in Telangana by the school students, written by people belonging to certain ideological persuasions, and these things show all of these things, distortions, erasures, bias, errors, and so on. And I claim we cannot build a national identity when our narrative has got so much of distortion. Like I said, today you have rioting happening all over the country, and the reason is because everybody's mapped strange identities to themselves. Some people say that this is who Indian identity is. You go to southern India and somebody, Dravidian or somebody, this is who I am, this is my identity, and so on. So the tragedy is that out of all of this 70 years of feeding us with a certain kind of an identity, we need to unravel, deconstruct our thinking and try to figure out who we are. So the story of the Indian civilization, the mainstream narrative says Aryan invasion, but then evidence will show out of India. They say Indic thought only impacted the East, but we show it impacted East and West. They say Indic civilization is recent, we show it is pretty ancient. They say that Indic thought borrowed from Greeks and Babylonians, but we show that the Indic thoughts seeded the Greeks and Babylonians. All this I've done in the past 2 Indic Srijan talks. So if you're interested in these topics, please go and see the last 2 talks over there. Today I'm going to be covering this main thing where it says, the mainstream says Indians are Aryans and Dravidians and tribals also. Whereas I will show that these identities are manufactured. We've also addressed this in past talks. Vedic culture is responsible for poverty, as shown invasions are responsible. So here we are. What is the story of the Deep South? This is something that we are not addressed very often in our discussions. I'd like to go in fairly some detail with this. So today the Dravidian claims are such that it is unique to Tamil Nadu. If you take somebody from Karnataka, from Andhra, Telangana, or Kerala, the chances are they wouldn't even see themselves as so-called Dravidians. They wouldn't even see themselves as a different identity. This is a problem that is unique to Tamil Nadu, the Dravidianism claim. There is a claim that there existed an ancient Dravidian civilization in the sunken region called Kumari Kandam. There is a claim that Harappan people were Dravidian. Aryan invasion supposedly drove the Dravidians to the south, and the Aryans are oppressors. The claim is Tamil is the oldest language, and we have our Prime Minister who himself went and proclaimed this, and it is distinct from Sanskrit. It says that Dravidians are racially distinct from northern Indians. Oldest Indian scripts are in Tamil Brahmi, and pure Tamil or Sen Tamil can be got by removing Sanskrit from all the Tamil works of ancient times. It says that the Dravidian people are descended or related from or to the Elamites. And Thiruvalluvar, who was a saint in Rishi, if you will, in ancient Tamil Nadu, he was influenced by Thomas the Apostle. So the last two claims are part of the Dravidian Christian claims, which is very, very prominent, which says that they're related to Elamites and Thomas the Apostle. So when we look at ancient Tamil history and try to see what can we make out of it, the earliest that we have is something called the Sangam periods. So the Sangam periods are recounted by 5th century work by Nakira, who is a Pandyan, who says that the first Sangam was for 4,400 years in Then Madurai. Then Madurai is southern Madurai, attended by 459 poets, including the rishi called Agastya. Then it says the second Sangam period was for 3,700 years in Kapatapuram, attended by 59 poets and Agastya. It implies that Agastya could have been a title for different people of a particular sampradaya. And it says that these two cities were both submerged and all the literary works of that era was lost. And the third Sangam is in Uttara Madurai, that is present day northern Madurai, and that lasted for 1850 years. So if we look at Times of India and on a particular report, it says Tamilakam, which is this area, had interfaces with more than 30 cultural groups and more than 40 port cities across Indian Ocean, Red Sea, Mediterranean. It was an exchange network of people, goods, cultures, and technologies. So it's fairly obvious we have such a long coastline. This is a maritime-based civilization. If there was one, it's a maritime civilization. We need to look for evidence of that. Some more of the Sangam period, this 15th century poet in a particular work, he says that land from Pahroli river in the north to Kumari river in the south was lost. Both are located to the south of Kanyakumari, and it covered an area of 700 kavatam. We don't know what that measurement kavatam is, so it's just a figure that is there in this particular 15th century work. Some more medieval writers say there's loss of land south of Madurai. 1st century BC work also measures the loss of Pandyan area to the sea. There is a 6th century work that mentions that the Pandyan king, because Pandyan lands were lost to the sea, he says he took an equal measure of land from the Cheras and the Cholas, from both sides. So that work is also there to compensate. However, not one of these accounts uses the word called Kumari Kandam, which is very, very common in today's narrative. So we go to see who even brought this word Kumari Kandam to the discourse. So Kumari Kandam appears in Kanda Puranam, written by Kachyapa Shivacharya in 1350, as a place where Shiva worshipping Brahmins live, and it is nothing to do with land loss. 20th century Tamil supremacists, they seized upon the failed theory of Lemuria, and they proposed that lost land was Kumari Kandam. Now we must go back to the 19th century when the geologists of that era, they were trying to study why is that the shape of the continents is such that it's like a jigsaw puzzle, they seem to fit to each other. You see that Madagascar fits into Africa, southern India fits over here, and so on and so forth. And they proposed that there was a lost continent over there. The lost continent was Lemuria. But that theory was discredited pretty soon once they discovered plate tectonics and so on. They said that there's no such thing as Lemuria. However, it was too late because the Tamil supremacists had seized upon that land. And they said that Kumari Kandam was a land from southern India over here, all the way to Australia over here, up to Madagascar over here. So this is the claim. If you look at Tamil works, supremacists talk about Kumari Kandam. This is the claim that there was a lost land. So if we go looking scientifically for an evidence for this, the only time it might have been possible is the last glacial maximum, an ice age, when it was about 26.5 thousand years ago to 19,000 years ago. The sea levels were 125 meters lower than today, and vast ice sheet covered most of North America. We also had a late glacial climate warming about 13 to 10,000 years ago when the cold event was over and water started submerging. Why am I saying all these things? Because if you look at National Geographic, there is reference to something called Dogger Land. So Dogger Land was this area that you see here. And if you look at this very carefully, you'll recognize that this is the United Kingdom. And around United Kingdom is land. And this land was called Dogger Land, and here's the North Sea over here. So 17,000 years ago, there was land over here. You could have walked from mainland Europe into United Kingdom, and 9,000 years before present, all of this was land. So this is what I wanted to show, that today, if you use Google Earth and try to see what is the sea depth in these areas, you find that in this 17,000 years, it is 122 meters or 400 feet. And over here it is 2,700 meters where it falls off, or 9,000 feet. And here is 31 meters at the channel over here, or around 100 feet. So I said, if 9,000 years ago in United Kingdom, Dogger Land, this was the sea level and this is the land level, what would have been the case in India, closer to the equator? What would have been the sea level? Can we think there's a land over there? So I went around and tried to see Google Earth, trying to see what is the sea depth, and it looks like over here it is 4,570 meters, that is 4 kilometers depth. And over here it is 3,800 near Madagascar, 3,700 near Australia, 5,200. And I say that any area 122 meters and less would be candidate for Kumari Kandam. Because that's the extent of the ice age, right? When ice age locked up most of the water in ice, anything that is 122 meters in depth would have been a candidate for Kumari Kandam. But we are finding that in southern India, there is absolutely no place that is 122 meters and less, especially where it is claimed to be the lost land. And if you go closer into the coastline of India, then we see that around Kerala it is 120 meters over here, 150 meters here, and just outside Kanyakumari 10 meters, and 8 meters near Park Strait, this north of Park Strait. And this side of Sri Lanka it is 3,500 meters. Just this side of Sri Lanka it falls off to 2 kilometers here, 1 kilometer here, 1 kilometer, and so on. So if there was land, the land would have extended only over here, Kumari Kandam, 9,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago. I made a crude estimate and said that around 160,000 square kilometers would have been lost from Kanyakumari onwards to the north of Sri Lanka. That would have been the extent of land loss if there was Kumari Kandam. This is the civilization that would have existed. A coastal civilization might have existed over here. So the reality is, climate records and seafloor depth show there is no scope for a continent stretching from India to Madagascar to Australia. Up to 90 miles from present shoreline was above sea level, up to 12,000 BCE. We might have had sudden sea rise level at global temperature around 7,000 BCE. We could also have had subduction earthquake. We saw what happened in Indonesia, right? With the subduction earthquake, the land dipped by 6 meters. So we could have had things like that, but not to the depth seen. I don't think it would have subduction to 1 kilometer, 2 kilometers. That wouldn't have happened. Coastal Tamil Nadu probably experienced submerging around 9,000 years ago. Now, if we look at other texts to see evidence of southern Indian mention in our texts and so on, you find that there's a story of Agastya in the extreme south. We know that Agastya came from the northern part of India, crossed the Vindhyas, told the Vindhyas, don't grow till I come back, and he's supposed to have come to the south. So, Professor Abhyankar said, if Agastya was the first to cross Vindhyas and see Canopus, Canopus is a star that we called Agastya, then the date is 5200 BC. So what is this graph over here? This graph shows the appearance and disappearance of a star called Agastya. Agastya is a star in Greek that we called Canopus. So I drew this map from the latitude of Jaffna. So this is the horizon, the east, south and west. And you see that Agastya just appears over Jaffna over here in this particular time frame that I've listed 12,000 years ago. 12,000 years ago this appeared. So Professor Abhyankar said, Agastya appeared in Kanyakumari in 10,000 BCE. It appeared in Madras around 8,500 BC, Hyderabad in 7,200 BC, Vindhyas 5,200, New Delhi 3,100 BCE. Today we are here where Agastya is visible all over India, but will go on a disappearance curve also, and from Kanyakumari 11,000 years from now you won't even see Canopus anymore. Why is that? Because in my old talks I talked about precession, right? Earth is precessing at 26,000 years, tracing a very slow circle in the sky. So right now, from the northern India is the northern hemisphere, Agastya is a star in the southern hemisphere. Normally from India we cannot see Agastya, but if you think of the whole of the earth as dipped in this way, right? Precession has dipped in this way, giving us a view of the southern hemisphere. So pretty soon you can think that the whole precession will dip in this way and we won't see Agastya anymore. So that is the appearance and disappearance cycle that you're talking about over here. So we know that there is a story in our Puranas of Agastya drinking up the ocean water, because the god said there are some demons living under the sea, so can you drink up the ocean water? Agastya drinks up the ocean water and then they go and kill the demons. And after some time, the god say, give up the waters again, the earth needs water. So he gives up the water, the oceans are refilled again. So this one, if we think that it corresponds to the late glacial maximum, it corresponds to 12,000 years ago. If you think about the refilling of the ocean because of ice age melting, that corresponds to 7,000 years ago. So I'm putting some factoids together over here about the story of Agastya, about the eyewitness accounts from the Tamil literary work that talks about Kumari Kandam, land loss, Pandyan king taking land to compensate, all of these things, ice age levels and so on. It appears that there's some truth to some of these things that we see over here, that if you can imagine that somebody coming to southern part of India, 10,000 BC, and sees suddenly there's a new star that has come on the horizon. It's just coming on the horizon and dipping. You could not have seen this from interior India because you have mountains, you've got valleys, you cannot see that. But if you're in southern India, right at the tip, and there's only the ocean to see, at the horizon you can see there's a new star that came there. And that new star would have come in 10,000 BCE. So that's the story of Agastya. I'd like to go from that into some southern Indian archaeology. Today there is news all over the place about Kiradi and places like that, and we'd like to understand what is happening over there, what are the artifacts being found there, what are the claims being made by the Tamil Nadu government of archaeological department and so on. So I'd like to talk about Kiradi to Adichanallur. This is a bird's eye view of the site in Kiradi. So Kiradi is a site on the banks of the Vaigai river. It's around outside of Madurai, maybe about 20 miles or so outside of Madurai. I can't show it to you on the map over here, it's here, but I can't locate where Madurai is over here. So from this paper over here, excavations at Kiradi between 2014 and 2016, from this I got these pictures over here. This is a very interesting picture because it shows that terracotta pipes. Where did we last see pipes in the Indian civilization? We saw that in Harappa. We saw that in the Indus Valley civilization, drainage systems, pipes, and so on and so forth. So when the archaeologists saw this, they were super excited. They said that is this somehow linked with the Harappan technology and so on and so forth. We have not seen this earlier in some of the other Indian sites. So that's why there was a lot of exuberance in Indian press when this came out. And there is a lot of brick lining over here, as well as drainage. I didn't include those pictures, also drainage pictures and so on and so forth. And a lot of other finds, things like seals, some terracotta figurines and pots and so on. This excited a lot of people because they found pottery shards with Tamil Brahmi on them. And you find these things over here, Tamil Brahmi, and this is very interesting, a fish. If you remember the Indus Valley script, you remember that one of the most frequent signs you see there is a fish. And so seeing a fish over here was once again exciting to the archaeologists who made very, very quick connections trying to talk about Harappa and so on and so forth. And they also found some jewelry and some artifacts like a comb, ivory comb, some beads and a pestle and a mortar and those kinds of common things you expect to see in a civilization. And some more that hints at industry in Kiradi, things like buttons and weaving industry, glass beads, game pieces. One might remember game pieces from Harappa also, and you see that there are game pieces over here. And so again, terracotta figurines and some bone points which might have used for hunting and so on. And some again agate beads. In 2017, they did the carbon dating at Kiradi. So the news report said they had dug up to 4.5 meters at Kiradi. They took carbon samples from the middle layer, from the 2-meter depth, and they sent it off to Florida for carbon dating, and it came back with 3rd century BCE. So when this result came, I proposed that the terminus layer of Kiradi should be around 3000 BCE. I did a linear curve fitting, and I said that if the top layer is 2017 and 2 meters down to 300 BCE, then taking a straight line fit, then at 4.5 meters, it's got to be 3000 BCE. So very recently in 2019, they released 6 more carbon dating results, which they took at various depths. They took it at 200 centimeter depth, at 353 centimeter depth, and they came around with some dates of 6th century BC and 3rd century BC. This is a carbon sample. They sent it off to a lab in Florida once again, and I fit 2 lines to these things, and I'm not going to talk about the mathematics and so on. But the bottom line is I said that from the present year around 2000, if you take the first line, it seems to go until around this point for the 2 meter depth. Then if you take the earlier curve, it goes down. So 4.5 meters is over here. That corresponds to 3000 BCE. Whereas if you take the new line, it terminates somewhere over here around 800 BCE. So I said the range for the lowest strata of Kiradi can range from 821 BC to 3000 BC, corresponding to 4.5 meters depth. And I'm suggesting that we need to be more optimistic. So the true date can be anywhere from 800 to 1000 BC. So where is the real date? In order to do that, I'm suggesting that let's take a look at what happened in what we found in Bet Dwaraka. How many of you know where Bet Dwaraka is? It's right, it's an island outside Dwaraka, right? So in Bet Dwaraka, Professor S.R. Rao, he had found pottery inscriptions that looked like a transitive script between the Indus script to Brahmi. So they called it a transitive script. And he decoded the script and suggested that it tells something. We'll talk about this a little later on. In Kiradi too, they found that there's a lot of what they call graffiti, and this graffiti seems to bear resemblance to Indus signs, and that caused a lot of excitement too. And so I am suggesting that if there was contact between the regions via sea trade in a very early period of time and sharing knowledge of writing, this is possible. And given that we have a transitive Indus to Brahmi inscription in Bet Dwaraka in 1500 BCE, I'm taking the average of these two and I'm saying that Kiradi is probably 1900 BCE. That is probably the date for the terminus layer over there. So from that we'll move on to, we talked about this earlier, in southern India you also have Arikamedu glass factories over there that has been dated around 300 BC and maybe even older over there. One more archaeological site in the south that is called Adichanallur. So Adichanallur is near Thoothukudi in southern India. And they found a lot of things. For example, they found urn burials and gold diadems. They call pattam. And even now in southern India, even in some places in northern India, during wedding times, you find the bridegroom, he wears a head ornament. So that basically is an old custom, very, very, very old custom in India. And you find that even in southern India, there's gold leaf pattam over there. They found what they call the bronze of Mother Goddess. And this really gets me because this is a word that was introduced by the Marxists. In India, we have nothing like Mother Goddess. We know what Shakti is. All of us everywhere know what Shakti is. We have no clue what Mother Goddess is. So, but at any rate, this is called Mother Goddess. And it is dated to around 1500 BCE. They found skulls of foreigners from Southeast China, Mediterranean Africa around 2500 BCE in this part of India. The skulls show abnormalities. What are these abnormalities? It is reminiscent of deep sea divers. If you go deep sea diving, then there is some nitrogen pockets that happen in the bone, causes some changes in the structure, causes holes in your skull literally. And because of that, they know there were deep sea divers for pearls. They were pearl fishermen, right? They go deep diving, pick up a pearl and come. So they studied 170 skeleton remains, and they say Caucasoid constitutes 35%, Mongoloid 30%, Negroid 14%, and so on, what they call Dravidian 8% in mixed rates. However, this paper also says that the population changed by 500 BCE. Or whoever was there earlier, 2500 years BC, 2500 BCE, that is entirely changed by 500 BCE. So, way back in 2005 when the tsunami hit southern India, it also uncovered certain things at Mahabalipuram. And one of the things it uncovered was a temple that is 2200 years old, that is 200 BC. So what am I doing so far? We talked about Kiradi. We talked about Kiradi and we said that the declared dates are 600 BCE. However, I'm proposing 1900 BC for the reason of Brahmi and transitive Brahmi and so on. From there, we went to Adichanallur. We went to Adichanallur and said, look at the artifacts they found over there. And now I'm come to 2200 years ago, saying that appears to have what we call Hindu culture, the temples, actual remains of temples, where they're declaring as a temple at this point. Addressing the issue of, are the Dravidians connected to the Elamites, the Proto-Elamites? Who are the Elamites? The people who lived near the Iranian area, the Susa and other places near the Iranian area. They were the Elamite people. So they had a script that looks like this. It is not deciphered even today. Elamite appears in 2500 BCE. It was used for 2000 years. Even when Alexander came to that part of the world, they were using this script in that part of the world. And this professor says neither Proto-Elamite or later lenient Elamite has been deciphered. So although some linguists believe Elamite related to Dravidian languages, which includes Tamil and the Elamo-Dravidian languages, however, they say that there's no proof. We don't even know what Elamite is, let alone a connection between Elamite and the so-called Dravidian. So based on the reconstructions available, there are people making some of these claims. So I don't think you can take this very, very seriously as yet. So if we talk about, we talked about archaeology, we talked about Kumari Kandam first, we talked about archaeology, then we started talking about Brahmi, because there's a claim now that Brahmi, Tamil Brahmi is the oldest script found in India. If you leave the Indus Valley script aside, this is the oldest script found in India. We're going to evaluate some of these claims. So what is the story of scripts? What is the Harappan script and how is it related to Brahmi? Here is an example of the Brahmi script. So there are three hypotheses on the Indus script, and this is from a work by Rajesh Rao, Professor Rajesh Rao. So he says hypothesis 1, the Harappan script does not encode language. It only shows signs. For example, today we have a signpost saying right turn only, left turn, stop, and all these kind of things, using these kind of things. So it is only a sign language. It does not encode language. Second hypothesis is that it encodes an Indo-European language, like Sanskrit, for example. The third one is that it encodes a Dravidian language. So these are three claims on what the Indus script could be related to. So he did a mathematical analysis. So what he said is, for all these scripts, he took a sequence length of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or 6 and wanted to study mathematically something called entropy. Entropy is the information content or the disorder, if you will. So he said, if I take a purely random sequence, the maximum entropy can be this black straight line over here. Then he took DNA sequences and he tried to see how much of information content is a DNA sequence, and he found that comes somewhere over here. Then he took protein sequence, it comes over here. Then he took music scores, Western music scores and so on, and he found that also comes here. So all the non-linguistic things that he took by his algorithm seem to be lumped up together over here. Then he took Tamil, English, Sanskrit, Tagalog, Indus, Sumerian, Fortran programming language and so on, and tried to see where do these things fit. Fortran was the least disorder because Fortran is a very, very structured language. It has got very little syntax to work with, very, very structured. So it has very little disorder over here. But he found that other things are clustered right over here, showing that the Indus script could contain linguistic data. That is the implication. I hope you understand what I'm saying. So his theory was that it encodes linguistic data. So that's what I've shown. Random sequence at the top and no variation at the bottom. And so the Indus and Sumerian scripts are in the ballpark of being linguistic. And however, I'm saying that don't look at this and say that, oh, it is closer to Old Tamil compared to Sanskrit. That may not be something that we can conclude. So here there are a couple of researchers that I put over here. And Dr. Srini Kalyan Raman, he wrote this book on hieroglyphs of the Indian linguistic area. And he says these pictures convey text messages in cryptic form. And he says a rebus. A rebus is like a word puzzle. Today, many of the kids, when they're texting, they say, I'll be late. They say L and 8, which says late, right? Or things of that nature. That's a rebus. It's a word example. It's a cryptic example, a puzzle. So he said that the Indus script is a rebus that draws from tribal languages and classical languages for India, and it shows that it represents a metallurgical society. So many of the words that in Indus script was basically referring to a metallurgical society. On the other hand, we have this person, Egbert Richter Ushanas, who said that the logograms seem to encode messages from the Rig Veda. So he took several of the Rig Vedic verses and he showed that the Rig Vedic, the Indus script can be translated as having encoded some of these messages over here. Professor S.R. Rao in 1982 in a paper, he took 62 signs and showed that it encodes Sanskrit in this particular work, Decipherment of the Indus script. You can follow this for more reason. Then this Finnish professor, Asko Parpola, he proposed that it is related to the Dravidian languages. For example, taking this fish sign, in Tamil it is called meen. Meen is fish. So he says the intended meaning is either fish or a star. Then if there is a fish and two lines, the line is like a sphere. A sphere is called a whale in Tamil, or a veli. So he says that means it's Venus or a white star. Similarly, if there are 6 lines, 6 fishes, that's mean Aru mean. And he says that is Kritika, because Kritika is a bunch of 6 stars and so on. So this is a reconstruction. So you don't have to immediately say this is correct. It's appealing. It looks very appealing and very nice to imagine that. However, it is one of the decodings possible. Iravatham Mahadevan also leaned towards Indus script being Dravidian languages, and he proposed certain things over here. So what I'm saying here is, when some phenomena can be represented by multiple models, that means we don't have something important to discriminate it yet. For example, if I say, I want to go from here to the airport, Indira Gandhi T3 airport. And if you go to Google, it will say there are one route you can go like this, another route you can go like this, another route you can go like this. So there is no key discriminator yet. All these appear to be right, but there's no one single discriminator saying this is the correct route to take. You understand that? So that's what I'm saying. Mathematically, we still don't have a key discriminator. So I'm saying, can we hope for a Rosetta Stone from future archaeology, maybe in Mesopotamia? Maybe something in Mesopotamia might turn up that has got the missing link that says Indus script, this is what it is. But we don't have any such thing today. So I'm opening the next question then. How is the Indus script related to the later Indian scripts like Brahmi? What is the relationship? For that, I'm appealing to the work by Professor Subhash Kak in Cryptologia in 1990. What he did was, he took shows 2 tables over here, the 10 most common Brahmi letters in rank order with percentage. He says that if a frequency understanding of the script says this is the most common Brahmi sign, second most common, third most common, and so on. Then he took the Mahadevan concordance of Indus signs and said these are the most common Indus signs. And then if you start looking at these 2, you start seeing some patterns, right? You start seeing some patterns that, yes, these things could be related in some way, like for example, this one to this one, from this one to this one, from this one to this. There appears to be some relationship over here. So by looking at purely the frequencies which you can test or anybody can test, it appears that there is some kind of an evolution from the Indus to Brahmi. And Subhajit Ganguly, 2012, in this paper, he shows that you actually can take some of the Harappan scripts and show how it evolves into Brahmi. So he's proposed several of these signs and showing the evolution of these into Brahmi. Now, colonial historians, what did they say? Colonial historians said that all the world's languages came from Phoenician script. The Phoenicians are people who lived somewhere near Israel or some place like that. And they said that the Phoenician script was the oldest, and from Phoenician script we got Archaic Greek, Archaic Roman, as well as the common today's English. So this sign became like this, and became A. And on this side it became Brahmi, and development of Brahmi to modern Nagari script. He shows this how they happened. It's again a model. It's a proposal and it's a model. So they said that Phoenician gave rise to these things, and Buhler suggested it gave rise to Brahmi, which gave rise to Nagari, another script. However, if you go and see which is the earliest Phoenician alphabet that we have in the archaeological record, it turns out to be 850 BCE from something called Ahiram Sarcophagus, and it appears fully developed. When you expect to see a script, you want to see it showing stages of development, but it appeared as if it's a fully developed script, implying it came from somewhere else. So the oldest Brahmi script we have found, the archaeological record, is 500 BCE, and the transitive Brahmi which I've shown, it is around 1500 BCE. So right here, you can start asking questions. Flags are going up and saying that it appears that in India, we have some scripts that appear to be much older in the Brahmi, transitive Brahmi. And there's a claim by colonials that is held today that Phoenician gave rise to, or they call it Semitic scripts, that gave rise to these things. So if you look at what is the relationship of modern scripts to Brahmi, you can see that the Brahmi script gave rise on one side to the Gupta script, to Nagari, to Sharada, to Gurumukhi, to Oriya, Devanagari, to Bengali, on Manipuri, Gujarati. And on this side, Kadamba gave rise to Kannada and to Telugu, and the Grantha gave rise to Tamil, Malayalam, Sinhala. And from here, it also went to Southeast Asia, to Khmer, to Balinese, Javanese, Thai, Laotian, Mon people, Burmese. So you can see how the Brahmi script has given rise to a family of modern day languages all over the place, northern India and southern India. So this is our relationship from Indus to Brahmi to present day scripts. This is what we have today. So if you look at how did the scripts go, we have the North Brahmic script and the South Brahmic script. And here are some of them: Siddham, Kharoshti, Nepali, Devanagari, Gupta, Telugu, Kannada, Tamil, and so on. You can see that Nagari is over here and so on. Siddham script went to China, to Japan, and so on. And from here, this could be somewhat in dispute because there is also research saying that Japanese script could have been influenced by the old Tamil script also, Tamil Brahmi script. But anyway, this is one of the models that is proposed, and how it went to Java, to Mindanao, to other places. This is how Brahmi scripts influenced this part of the world. So coming to Bet Dwaraka, the marine archaeology. So in this paper, Archaeology of Bet Dwaraka Island, they got these things over here. They got this artifact and this very, very interesting artifact which S.R. Rao decoded as an old Indo-Aryan Iranian language. This should be in quotation marks. And he says datable to 1500 BCE. And he says that the sea lord protect. That is what the transitive script says over here. Here's one more script that seems to show animal motif, the unicorn and other things, very, very common in Indus script. Now coming to Tamil Brahmi itself, there appeared to be a whole lot of Tamil Brahmi scripts. For example, 1st century over here, 1st century over here, and some more scripts in Sri Lanka, 200 BCE. And from the Tamil Nadu Archaeological Department, we find from 1st century BCE and 2nd century. The oldest Tamil Brahmi script found, or any Brahmi script found in India, archaeologically, can be dated to Parani. Parani is a place in southern India, in Tamil Nadu, and this is the script over here. And this Professor Rajan from Pondicherry University, he excavated this. He found this pot, and inside the pot was paddy. So very luckily, this carbon material there sent off a carbon dating and came to 500 BCE. That's how we know the date of this. Then Adichanallur and Porunthal we found from 540 BCE. One more of these things, and here are some of the artifacts they found from here. So we've been talking about scripts all the while over here. What is this Tamil Brahmi? Where did Brahmi come from? Did it come from Harappan script? And finally, how is Tamil related to Brahmi? So it turns out that if you look at this center representation of Brahmi, there appears to be a left evolution and a right evolution for Tamil. In this right evolution, this is the modern Tamil over here. And if you look at the chronology from Tamil Brahmi, it went to something called Vattirthu. Vattirthu went to the left side and arrested development, does not show up in the archaeological record anymore over here. And Tamil Brahmi gave rise to Pallava Grantha, gave rise to Chola Pallava, gave rise to Vijayanagara, then to modern Tamil. This is how the Brahmi script has evolved. So when somebody comes and says Tamil is the oldest language, oldest script and so on, how do you decode these claims? That is the reason why I'm trying to show all these things and trying to tell you that there's a co-evolution. All over India, there's a co-evolution of scripts and co-evolution of things happening, and they all appear to be related to the Harappan script also in some way through the transitive Harappan script. I gave a couple of researchers, Subhash Kak and Rajesh Rao, to show these things. Now, in all of my talks, you'll see that I talk about the archaeological record. I also talk about the paradox that we have in India, that we have a lot of things in our literature that does not have archaeological support. And here is one such thing. What are the non-Harappa references to writing? This is very famous. All of us know this. This is deeply embedded in the Indian context, right? So when Vyasa wanted to write the Vedas, he said that I need a scribe to do that. And Ganesha came, broke off his tusk, Ekadantaya, and he started writing the whole of these things. Very, very famous. So in this paper over here, this man actually went through a study of all these references. So Max Mueller, he says the writing started in the so-called Sutra period. We'll talk about this later. Panini seems to be referring to Lipikara, which is a scribe. He also refers to Yavanai Lipi, the so-called, not Greek, just Yavana. We don't know what Yavana is. Manu refers to Lipi and Lekhita. Manu also, he denounces forgers of land. So not only was the writing, there's also forgery in that time frame itself, because he's denouncing the forgery at that time. Yajnavalkya refers to writing on cotton cloth or copper plates. Vishnu, I don't know which Vishnu it is, I'm questioning, is it Dharmottara? It refers to writing. In Buddhist Lalita Vistara, it refers to alphabet that Buddha learnt. Buddha learnt several alphabets, and recounting of that is in that work. Strabo, the Greek, he said that Indians wrote on cotton cloth, same as Yajnavalkya said. Majesthines said Indians had mileposts and road names. When he came to Magadha, he could see all of these things. Strabo, quoting somebody else, says Indians knew writing in the 4th century BCE. Arthashastra says Lipi was a part of instruction in India. So these are the non-Harappan references. We can't date them precisely. If you remember my older talks, you'll see that I dated Yajnavalkya to approximately 3000 BCE. So from that time frame, we seem to be talking about writing in the Indian context. So the conclusion from southern archaeology and scripts, we talked about the Vaigai River excavation at Kiradi, and I said that carbon dating from 300 to 600 BC, that's the golden standard. However, I did analytical inferences for the terminus layer using mathematical models, and I said that it could be 820 BC to 3000 BC with a mean of around 1900 BCE. We talked about Indus script. We said there are 3 hypotheses. One is it could encode sign, or it could be a so-called Aryan language or a so-called Dravidian language. Brahmi, we said that appears to be derived from the Harappan script. We found a transitive script in Bet Dwaraka around 1500 BCE. Tamil Brahmi, archaeologically the oldest find is 540 BCE in Parani. Brahmi has given rise to all the present Indian language scripts, several references to writing in ancient Indian literature, and the evidence is inconclusive. So when somebody comes and claims antiquity, oldest and so on, I would caution that you must not buy in these claims immediately. There's probably, we don't have enough evidence to say that one was the oldest or something's not the oldest. So script is only one part of the story. The other part of the story is language. You know that language can be written in any script, right? In fact, we saw Brahmis can be used for anything from Oriya to Kannada, Telugu to Hindi, whatever. So when you talk about language, I ask the question, who coined Dravidian as a separate family? So that's a question we want to ask. What is the origin of the word Dravidian? Dravida is a Sanskrit word. It's used to denote the geographical region of southern India. Varahamihira and Brihat Samhita places Dravida to the southwest and east. Parasharas, he placed it to the east. Dravida is used in Tantra Vartika by Kumarila Bhatta. Adi Shankara and Saundarya Lahiri, he refers to himself as a Dravida Shishyu, meaning that he's a person who came from the southern parts of India. The missionary Robert Caldwell, he's the person who coined this English word called Dravidian. So we're going to investigate this a little more. I'd like to ask a question, who was the first person who caused the division of Sanskrit versus Dravidian? Today is a received wisdom, right? None of us even bother to think about these things. Received wisdom, separate languages. When William Carey, Thomas Colebrook and Charles Wilkins, they all believed that every Indian language is derived from Sanskrit. That was their thinking when they first came to India and so on. However, there was a person called A.C. Campbell who was based in the Telugu regions, and he wrote a book called Telugu Grammar in 1816. His primary aim was to disprove these guys, to show that no, there is one more language family in India and it's not all from Sanskrit. His mentor was somebody called Francis White Ellis, and he wrote a 40-page foreword to this Telugu grammar, and that has come to be called as a Dravidian proof. So in this 40-page proof, he went around saying, for example, he took a word list. One example that I give you is for milk. Milk is such a deeply embedded word in our culture, right? Because farming, animal husbandry, and so on. So he said, in southern India, if you go and look at the Tamil word, it's called pala. If you go to Telugu, it's called palu. If you go to Kannada, it is called halu. If you go to Hindi, it's called dudh. If you go to Sanskrit, it's called dugdh, and so on. So different languages, different things. So he said that from dudh to palu is such a big difference. That means they're probably not related. So he came about with a bunch of words like this, including the structure of the, he compared a word list from Dattapatha. I think it is a work from Panini's word list, and Telugu list by Shastri. The Shastri professor was working in a Sanskrit college, and he compiled this list for him, and he worked off on that one, compared the roots of those words, compared word list of Kannada, Tamil, Telugu, showed the cognates. Cognates are when the words are all related to each other in some way, like halu, palu, pal, and all these kind of things. Compare the word list constructed from roots of Kannada, Tamil, Telugu with a prefix-suffix pattern and what meter was used, and he proposed that there is something called a Dravidian language. So once he did that, that was a received wisdom. Things have not changed since. That's the accepted way of doing it. His works were inherited by two missionaries. One is G.U. Pope and Robert Caldwell. And ever since it became the common way of looking at Southern Indian languages that they are a separate family called Dravidian. So this is G.U. Pope. So he came and he said in 1859 near Ooty, he said that Thiruvalluvar, who was a very, very famous, one of the most respected saints in Tamil Nadu, he said that in a credible tradition, he lived in St. Thom about the time when the first Armenian merchant settled there. His friend was a sea captain and was introduced to Christian ideas, and therefore his work contains a lot of Christian ideas. And here we have Rajiv Malhotra, who completely said it's a preposterous claim, and he showed why you cannot admit any of these things about Thiruvalluvar, who wrote the Kural and so on. So when you look at Dravidian languages today, the academia looks at it as a proto-Southern Dravidian, which gave rise to Tamil, Kannada, and Malayalam, and so on. The North Dravidian, which gave rise to Kuruk, to Brahui, and other pockets of so-called Dravidian languages in the north. Then in Proto-Central, that gave rise to these tribal languages over here. Then South Central Dravidian gave rise to Telugu and other scripts. So this is the way academics look at these languages today. So who is Caldwell? Caldwell was a missionary, linguist, bishop of Tirunelveli. He wrote a book on comparative grammar and southern languages. His biographer says his primary concern was to convert the South Indians to Christianity. That's where he came from. That was his motive. That's what he did. And over here, for example, he said he was trying to compare the role of Latin in Christian works with the role of Sanskrit in Tamil works. So he said you can readily remove the Sanskrit from Tamil works and get a more refined state, whereas English cannot abandon its Latin. So very, very interesting though, he's trying to always relate in his work on comparative grammar how, for example, 10 commandments expressed in the speech of lower class of Tamil people, the proportion of Sanskrit will be greatly diminished. You can see the lens with which he's coming. He's coming with a lens saying that they've identified the enemy is Sanskrit. We need to remove Sanskrit out if we want to convert the Southern Indian. So every one of their works was aimed at trying to write works of this nature. There's a lot of things I can underline over here, but not doing that. So he asserted that a group of people called Chanars were indigenous Dravidians. And the minute he said that, the Chanars went up in furious uprising because they didn't consider themselves as distinct from Hindus. They said, we are Hindus, how dare you remove us out of Hinduism? That was the thing. So he introduced the idea that ethnically that they were distinct from high-class oppressors. The Chanars were distinct from high-class oppressors. He coined the pejorative called Brahminical Aryan. So today if you see in your NCERT textbook words like Brahminical Aryan, you know it came from Caldwell. From Caldwell, it has come to the Marxist hands, and the Marxists are using it to their advantage today. So it is intended to manufacture history where that indigenous Dravidians are subdued and colonized by Brahminical Aryans. Like I said, the Chanars opposed the book, that they did not want to be divorced from Brahminical civilization. And the book was described as pejorative, outrageous, and paternalistic. However, the Tamil Nadu government in 1968, they honored him with a statue. If you go to Marina Beach in Chennai, you can see the statue today of this man. He introduced these ideas, ethnic distinctiveness of the Southern Indian. He introduced a pejorative called Brahminical. He introduced the idea that Southern people are oppressed and subdued. And he also said that you can get something called Sen Tamil, which means pure Tamil, by purging the Sanskrit from it. Remove the Sanskrit and replace it with Tamil words, and you'll get a purer form of Tamil. So he introduced these ideas. His legacy is what we are living with today. This is one of the biggest fault lines in India today, the Dravidian and the Aryan thing, which is an issue in Tamil Nadu more than anything else. So EVR, he formed the self-respect movement, the Dravidar Kazhagam, and his movement was supposedly dedicated to the goal of giving non-Brahmins a sense of pride based on the Dravidian past. His biographer wrote that. And in another book, Pandian, he wrote that he thought that Brahminical priesthood, Sanskritic social class hierarchy is blamed for existence of inequalities. He stated that Christian and Islamic religions were fulfilling social advancement, but the Hindu religion remained totally unsuitable for social progress. So this is the thinking is embedded even today when you see M.K. Stalin and others in bed with the Christians and Muslims and working against Hinduism. It's basically they've imbibed these ideas to a very deep extent. It's part of their DNA. He also released a map of a proposed Dravida Nadu at a separatist conference in 1940 at Kanchipuram, but the British obviously threw that whole thing out. They said, we're not going to make a separate Dravida Nadu over here. So legacy today, we are DMK and all these parties that continue this one. So I don't know why this whole thing is gone. There's a dark legacy of Caldwell. Oh, I don't know when I did this. Okay. So some of the academic works today, there is this Narasimhachari who wrote that ancient Dravidian religion is agamic and is non-Vedic. In modern review, worship of village deities, Ishtadevatas is pre-Vedic Dravidian religion. And in these works by these Westerners, presence of Dravidian loanwords in Sanskrit works proves synthesis of Vedic with Dravidian religion. Then the Simha in 1979, he showed that the famous ancient poems of Tamil Nadu, all these works, they show an ancient Dravidian religion. So this is where you are today. Today you have academia trying to show that the distinctive language, distinctive people, distinctive religion, distinctive literature, and so on. It's come to such an extent where the separatist ideas have become so deep and endorsed by academia. So that's where we are as a dark legacy. And also the very famous deities Murugan, who's Karthikeyan in northern India, and Shivan go to the Indus Valley civilization. Mahadevan and Vohra stated these things. I put this over here to give shock value. The shock value is there are so many hundreds and thousands of Indic writers from ancient times, very, very ancient times. Let's put a selection over here, Abhinav Gupta, Adi Shankara, Agathiyar, and so on and so forth. Who talks about Aryan invasion? Who talks about Dravidian here? Not one person anywhere in any Indian work from 2000 years ago, 3000 years ago, 1000 years ago, 500 years ago, nobody talks about we are a separate people. The southern Indian or the northern Indian never saw themselves as different from, I'm different from you, you're different from me. They never saw themselves as that. So that whole idea of North-South, Dravidian, Aryan is not present in a single work. I just put a selection of them over here, just to give a shock value that this is what our people said. However, when Caldwell and Geo Pope came along with Ellis White, all of a sudden we have become Aryans and Dravidians and North Indians and South Indians and oppressed, oppressor. So this is Nagaswamy, retired ASI General, Tamil Nadu Circle. He wrote this book, Tamil Nadu, Land of the Vedas. He examines a variety of literary works, epigraphy, Sangam era to medieval. He concludes that Vedic practice is deeply ingrained in southern India and is as old as the earliest literary works. Here is Professor David Shulman from Hebrew University. He wrote this book, Tamar, a biography. He examines a number of literary works and he talks about the erasure of Tamil intellectual tradition, a tyranny born of linguistic nationalism. So in other words, he is bemoaning the fact that the ancient literary works have been corrupted by removing their ancient idiom and putting a new so-called pure Tamil idiom into it. So he's bemoaning that erasure of Tamil intellectual tradition. And he talks about, he concludes that never was a time Tamil existed independently of Sanskrit. Very, very powerful words by two completely different researchers of contemporary times and what they thought about these things. So a research paper from Conrad Elst in Waves 2003, Are Dravidians native to the south? If you look at the substratum of places in Sindh, Gujarat, Maharashtra, they indicate Dravidian presence according to Parapola, who shows that things like Palli, Valli and Pata, Vada and Vad and all these things in Gujarat, the structural pattern is there in Marathi, Gujarati and Sindh, and he says these are all Dravidian words. How do these things appear over here? This, however, is present only in the coastline. It's conspicuously absent in Punjab, Haryana, Hindi belt. And I'm suggesting that because Tamil Nadu was a seafaring civilization, so they would start from maybe the ancient Kumari Kandam, which existed 90 miles south of Kanyakumari, and trade in pearls and cotton and so on, move from there to Koilan to maybe somewhere in Goa, Goa to Lothal, from Lothal maybe to somewhere in Sindh, and from Sindh to Red Sea area to go on to Babylon and Sumeria and so on. These are the ancient trading. Over thousands of years, these trading links have been developed. And in these coastal areas, they would import and export their culture. So the presence on coastline tells us that seafaring traders hopped on coastal cities from the south to Babylon, and that's how those words also might have changed. Michael Witzel says there is no Dravidian loan word in the oldest Vedic layers, and they appear later only in words of commercial transactions. Again, very interesting over there. Then there is more Sanskrit and Dravidian than so-called Dravidian and Sanskrit. And also this M. Renault in 1956, he says a Dravidian loan word ceased towards a common era, implying he's believing in Aryan invasion theory, implying exit of Dravidians in the Ganga Valley. So you find these things debated by Conrad Lelst over here. So in India today, academia calls it something called a linguistic area. Linguistic area is something academia uses to, they call it a Sprackbund, a place where many languages seem to coexist, and we have all of these language families, the sizes of these families over here. Today there are academicians who use something called Bayesian phylogenetics in order to try and see the roots of the so-called Proto-Dravidian. In other words, how are all these words, Tulu to Kannada to Malayalam, Telugu, all these words, how are they related to each other and where is their ancestor? So by making use of the same tools as genetics, they try to do mathematically to see where is it related, and they come with something like 2500 BC is where the ancestral Proto so-called Dravidian languages. However, the criticism to levy against these things is, why wouldn't they also investigate relationships with existing Indian languages, Sanskrit and other such languages? So if they had embedded the relationships and looked for a common root, we would have found different things. So they have already used Ellis White's idea that there is a Dravidian language in the northern Indian languages, and used that as a constraint to build these mathematical models, and used that in a circular logic to try and prove whatever they want to prove. So this is the fallacy of these kind of studies. One more thing about southern Indians and northern Indians, when they go around saying we are racially different people. So they go around saying that, look at me, I am dark, look at that guy, he's fair. Surely he's not the same race as I am. We are two different races. That's the kind of thinking that is there in very base level thinking in India. So some parts of India at least. So in this particular paper in 2013, these researchers came in this genetics saying that light skin allele of this SLC24A5 is related, shares identity by descent. Basically, it is something present in the 15th chromosome in the human body. It's a mutation. That mutation appeared around 22 to 28,000 years ago, and it is responsible for the expression of melanin. If you have that, then it defines how much of melanin you'll produce, and depending on the melanin you have, depending on the latitude in which you live, it tells you what skin tone you'll take on. If you live in the southern latitudes, more direct sunlight, you'll take on a darker skin tone. If you live in northern latitudes, lesser sunlight, you'll have a lighter skin tone. And if you did not have that, and you go to southern latitudes, your skin will burn and you'll get cancer, you'll get sunburnt. That is the thinking. So it is only the presence and absence of this allele that defines the skin color. It's nothing to do with race. Race is such a spurious term. It's not something that is present genetically at all. So here is an interesting paper that I found, and I live in Houston, so this caught my eye to see what on earth is going on over here. These researchers over here, they found that they want to study Houston Gujaratis versus Singapore Tamilians, who both lived, two groups that lived in Houston. They took their genetics, their DNA profiles, and tried to understand what are the differences. 85 Gujaratis and 83 Tamils in Singapore, and they found that whenever there is the blue color, it says that when the Gujaratis compared with Italian, if the similarity between them is greater than 0.5 and Gujarati to Tamilian is less than 0.5, it's a blue color. These are all the chromosomes 1 to 22, and the chromosomal length. If the red color says Gujarati to Italian is less than 0.5 and Gujarati to Tamil is greater than 0.5, then it is red. You can just eyeball this and see that there is more similarity than dissimilarity. Just eyeball it and see that. And you can see that in the 15th chromosome is over here, and right here you see the differences. That's a skin tone color. So looking at eyeballing these things and looking at it, we can say certain things, but then you can spin this in many ways, and that's what we find. Academics spin graphs like this and try to talk about distinctness. I can use the same thing to show similarity rather than distinctness. So the conclusion from Deep South is, I've examined some assertions about Dravidianism. Kumari Kandam stretching from Africa to Australia is highly unlikely, very, very exaggerated. Brahmi appears derived from Harappa. North and South variants appear to be present and impacted the entire Indic family of scripts are impacted by that. There is not sufficient evidence of Harappa being so-called Dravidian because that whole notion is spurious. We don't know what it means. Division of Indic languages into Indo-Iranian and Dravidian is based on Ellis, and I am suggesting it needs re-examination. Today, if I go around saying that, people say this guy's a fool. Our received wisdom is there are two language families. That's what social sciences study. But then perhaps there is need to examine that. Shiva and Kartikeyan are pan-Indian divinities. We didn't talk about that. We talked about Nagaswami Shulman, identifying Vedic in oldest Tamil literature, color differences due to this mutation. And the notion that Dravidianism is separate is spurious, and it's a manufactured identity. So we'll very quickly go over something called pan-Indian astronomy. Now my intention is to show that there is no distinction between Northern Indian and Southern Indian. So if you look at the astronomical model, we talked about this in the past. I won't talk in great detail about the Nakshatra Rashi model. What I wanted to show you was the names of the nakshatras in Northern India and in Southern India. And what you find is that, for example, Ashwini in Hindi is the same as Ashwini in Tamil. Wherever I got this, it is different. Ardra in Hindi is Thiruvadirai in Tamil. And if you go to Ashlesha, it is Ailiam over here. And Pura Falguni becomes Puram over here, Uttarayadam over here, Anusham and Ketai, and so on. So you find a few differences in the nakshatras, but you find more similarities in the astronomical model. That is the bottom line, right? So the regional variations, but the bottom line is there is utter similarity between the models over here. How old are the nakshatras? As old at least as the Atharva Veda. Atharva Veda in 1907, it shows this Griffith's translation. There's a whole list of nakshatra names over here, and they seem to be the Sanskrit names over here, not the Tamil variants. It's also there in Taittiriya Samhita. In this particular verse, you find a lot of the nakshatra names. Again, the names appear to be the Sanskrit names and not the Tamil names over here. Looking at antiquity of Vedanga Jyotisha, we look to see it is 1440 BCE because of the presence of winter solstice in Dhanishta Nakshatra. Vedanga Jyotisha talks about the winter solstice in Dhanishta Nakshatra, which in today's planetarium software you can simulate, and you can show that when the sun is in this winter solstice position, that date is 4400 BCE. If you look at Chatapatha Brahmana, there is a statement that Kritika never swerves from the east, and we can look at that heliacal rising of Kritika over here, and that date is 2982 BCE. The reason why I'm showing you all this now is to show the antiquity of the Indian civilization in the pan-Indian model. This is not a North Indian model and a South Indian model. I'm trying to show a pan-Indian model over here. There's an ancient epoch recorded in our tables, whether you go to Northern India, Southern India, for example, Chalukya dynasty in Karnataka, Aihole temple epigraphy, it talks about a particular thing. Lee Gentle got some tables from Southern India, from Trivellur, he called it. He got astronomical tables from the Pandits over there. And Cassini studied these things and said it refers to 3102 BCE. Playfair, Bentley and others refer to Surya Siddhanta, refer to the same thing. And all of these things is what we think is referring to Kali Yuga, which started in February 1831-02, the rendezvous at Revati Nakshatra, where all these planets are clustered over here. So here is an example of a pan-Indian idea encoded in Southern India, encoded in Northern India, and it refers to the same phenomenon over here. All over India, we talk about Aditi, mother of the gods. So Aditi and Kashyapa gave rise to the 12 Adityas, 11 Rudras, 8 Vasus. And we also know from Bhagavad Gita that the Devas are the part of Uttarayana and the Daityas are the part of Dakshinayana. And Nakshatra Punarvashu's derived, whose deity is Aditi. So basically, we know that if a mother is the mother of Devas and Daityas, she's equidistant from both of them. A mother is not partial to some sons and not partial to somebody else, equidistant. So we already get the notion that there is something to do with equinox, referring to Aditi and the Punarvashi Nakshatra. And Lokmanya Tilak and Abhyankar, they said it refers to vernal equinox at Punarvashi Nakshatra from the Rig Veda, and they said that that era is 6000 BCE. One more about Ashwinis. So the Ashwinis are mentioned 376 times in the Rig Veda. Whole lot of verses referring to them, and Rig Veda, Markandeya, all these Puranas refer to this. And we know from the Puranic story that as soon as she gave birth to the Ashwinis, Sanjana, who was the wife of Surya, couldn't take the heat. Surya was too hot, so she left him. left her shadow Chaya in place, said you take care of the Ashwinis, and she went off to southern regions where it was coolest. So sun is in the northern hemisphere, she's the southern hemisphere. Sun is in the southern hemisphere, she's the northern hemisphere. You know, as far away as she can get from him. So what is that? What does all this mean? So basically it means that when winter solstice happened at Ashwini Nakshatra, so this is again referred to by Balagangadhar Tilak and Abhyankar, because Rig Veda says Ashwinis appear at dawn for their share of sacrifice. Ashwinis appear at dawn for their share of sacrifice. So that means it is a winter solstice, that is when Ashwini is over here, they appear at dawn. The sunlight is over here, they appear at dawn. That refers to an era at 7200 BCE. Then if you read this book on history of astronomy by Anil Narayan, he's referring to a strange phenomenon in Surya Siddhanta. Surya Siddhanta has got a measurement of the star called Swati. Swati is a nakshatra. Here is a photo that I took. I'm also an astrophotographer, so I take pictures of planets and things. This Swati nakshatra over here is a red giant. It might go supernova soon. So this Swati is Arcturus. It appears in the Boots constellation. If you look at the Saptarishi, the tail of the Saptarishi points to Arcturus. That is where this one is. So when we look at the stars, we assume the stars are not moving. They appear the same place. Every year you come, we again see the same stars in the sky at a certain time. But the stars are also going through something called proper motion. Even the stars are flying away from each other or towards each other. And that's called proper motion. So when a star goes in proper motion compared to the sun, it has got a radial velocity, a space velocity, a transverse velocity. But when we see it from the sun, we see only the angle change. So for us, the notion of velocity is only the angle, how fast is the angle changing. So it turns out that Swati is one of the fastest stars that can be seen from the Earth in proper motion. It has 2 arc seconds a year. Every year it moves by 2 arc seconds. So the Greek records show that the Swati position is 1 degree off. So when the Greeks said here where Swati is, there is just 1 degree off from our present day measurement. And we can work backwards and say the Greeks measured that in 1800 BC, years ago, because of the rate at which we know Swati is moving. However, Surya Siddhanta's measurement of Swati is 6 degrees off compared to present day measurement. That means it is 60 times 60 times 6 divided by 2 arc seconds, that is 10,800 years old, almost 8000 BC. That is the age of Swati over here. One more phenomena called Rohini Shakatabeda, 9000 BC. I talked about this in the past, so I won't talk much about this. We already talked about Agastya and the deep south. Then there's one more ancient observation. Abhijit was a pole star. I've talked about this also in the past, where it refers to Abhijit in the pole star location around 14,000 years ago. So the Pan-India Astronomy Roundup says that the astronomical model is common to India. Whether you go to North India, South India, East, West, everybody used a Nakshatra Rashi model. Everybody had the same. There were regional differences in some of the names of the Nakshatras and Rashis, but that's about it. Many instances of interest can be dated with observations over here. We talked about Agastya observation in the south. We talked about Abhijit. We said that stories encoded ideas, models, and wisdoms. So having talked about the astronomy model, I'd like to use that to kill the Aryan invasion theory model. There's a rebuttal that we can do. Max Muller said that we can think of 4 periods in the Indian tradition: the Chandas period, the Mantra period, Brahmana period, the Sutra period. And these are the dates that he ascribed to these things. So he said earliest books of Rig Veda was in the Chandas period in 1200 BCE. Remaining books of Veda, Rig Veda in the Mantra period, 1000 to 800 BC. Brahmana, that's when Samaveda, Yajurveda, Aranyakas, Upanishads were composed. Vedangas and Chandas, Mitra, all these things were in the Sutra period over here. However, in this very quick astronomical model, I've shown to you that Vedanga Jyotisha, which is one of the Vedangas, is dated to 1400 BCE. So where is 1400 BCE and where is 600 to 200 BCE? Then he talks about Brahmana period in this time frame, but we saw Kritika and Chatapatha Brahmana 2982 BCE by making use of the measurement and where our modern understanding is. Where is that and where is 800 BC? We talked about Rig Veda. From Rig Veda, we talked about Aditi, we talked about Ashwini. 2 of the instances mentioned in Rig Veda, we took them, we decoded Lokmanya Tilak's understanding of that, and we said these dates correspond to 7200 BCE, 6000 BCE. Where is that and where is Chandas period? So using the astronomical model, you can demolish whatever Max Muller has proposed for the Vedic periods. But unfortunately, these are continued in our textbooks. Even today's, at the college level, university level, and so on, this is what is studied. And they completely neglect the astronomical model. And it's not surprising because whole of Western academia has worked to discredit Indian astronomy. So when somebody came to Max Muller and said, Mr. Max Muller, is all of Indian timeline held hostage to the biblical chronology? He got so upset that he wrote this in this particular book. He wrote in 40 pages or so, he addressed that criticism. Bottom line is, he said that he's going to reject all of the Indic chronology and only accept Colebrook's date for Vedanga Jyotisha at 1400 BCE because that is after the Aryan invasion theory of 1500 BC, then 1400 BC. So he said that is okay, but everything else he rejected. So here is one more book that alleged all of Hindu chronology was fabricated and very, very outrageous kind of thinking. But we honored him with a stamp. And we still honor. I remember talking to a professor from the Indian context. He's still a professor, I won't tell his name, a very famous man. You'd have heard him. So he also said the same thing to me. I don't believe in the astronomy model. But a deeper probing told me that his knowledge of Indian astronomy is close to zero. He has absolutely no understanding. He's merely echoing a view that was fashionable, made fashionable by Max Muller and the left liberal kind of thinking. So one slide on archaeological finds. Archaeology, paleontology shows great antiquity of human presence. We have artifacts from 1 million years ago, Homo erectus, Narmada man, we talked about this last year, 350,000 years ago. In Tamil Nadu, Athirampakkam, 350,000 years ago. Cave art in all over India, Bhimbetka and so on, 40,000 years ago. Southern India, Edakal, Birana in northern India, 10,000 years ago. Then in Dwarka, we have got underwater artifacts from 8,000 years ago, and recent artifacts from 5,000 to present in Harappa. Remember, Harappa is recent in this timeline. From Harappa, we have got artifacts, Ganga Plains, Kiradi, Arikhamedu, Pattanam, and so on. So we see that there is deep knowledge system showing high accomplishment in a variety of fields, evidence of highly cultured people from ancient times, pan-India evidence of cultural similarity, evidence of knowledge transmission to the world. Archaeology collaborates antiquity seen in astronomy, and so it implies an ancient civilization. Today you have seen a lot of noise on genetics. I've talked about genetics in the past, in the last 2 years, so please refer to those talks in detail. Here, I just want to talk about my approach to genetics. I say that there are concerns with methodology due to which genetic results cannot be global. Genetics requires models, methodology, data, samples, and claims. Each of these things can be deconstructed academically, and we can say that there are problems in these things. I put a downward arrow to show you my confidence limits levels with these things. The presence or absence of a genetic marker is a fact. If I say I'm carrying a certain mutation and you don't carry that mutation, that's a fact. I can't do much about it. So that can be accepted. Then if I say in this room, 20% have got a Dravidian gene and others have got an Aryan, a Sanskrit gene, now that is a questionable claim, including a direction of genetic flow. Then if somebody says that I've got 50% of things from Central Asia and 10% from Andamanese and so on, that is also very, very questionable. I put it in red and said I completely dispute these kind of things. So last year I talked about this. David Reich, he says that Central Asians and the present day Indians have a common recent ancestor from 4,000 years ago. So he says the R1A is, we are related with this Z93 measurement, that there's a common ancestor between Northern Indians and with Central Asians approximately 4,200 years ago. However, another paper by Lookhart that I talked about says that the common ancestor for Z93 between Indians and Central Asia is 15,000 years ago. So two different studies giving widely different answers should set red flags all over the place. There's a problem in methodology, problem in data, problem in assumptions, and so on. So I talked about this last year, won't go in detail, but mathematically can deconstruct assumptions, appropriateness, and so on. And my mantra is, just because convergence was obtained, it does not confer correctness of the methods, whether it is in admixture or whether it is in PCA analysis. Last year, the claim was in 2018 from David Reich's group that there were two waves of migration to India. One is around 7000 BCE. Some people came from the pastoral, Iranian pastoralists entered India and they became the ancestral South Indians and the ancestral North Indians. Then he said from Central Asia, approximately 4,000 years ago, these people came and they became the ancestral North Indians. So that was the model proposed by the Harvard Medical School group, and that was still last year, the received wisdom. And then this man, what is his name, Tony Joseph, went off and wrote a book that became a bestseller on who we are, how we got here. And I talked about this last year, that all of this evidence is completely at odds with the traditional idea that we have of migrations. If you look at the Indic texts, Vedas and Puranas, that talk about Anudrihyu, who migrate out of India and not into India. And we talked about the time when the Saraswati dried up in 1900 BCE, and we said that led to a migration event out of India, again not into India. So those things are not considered over here, and I said that is a problem with this whole thing. And guess what? They wrote a paper very recently, 2019, a paper came from the same team where they went back on that earlier ideas over here, that there is no Iranian pastoralists who came and gave their DNA content into India. And how did they do that? Because they went and they found a grave somewhere in Iran, 11 samples of people over there. And when they included those 11 samples in their DNA studies, all of a sudden the result, instead of converging to this answer, converged to mathematically to a different answer. And that different answer said there is no content from Iranian pastoralists in India. So this is the revised map now, that there is no content into India. Instead, the Indian model is indigenous to itself. However, they still claim that there is a Central Asian injection into India, forming the Aryan R1A content over here. And these people, Vasant Shinde and others, Neeraj Rai and others, they talk about indigenous Harappa and Aryans in Central Asia. So my question is, what has changed? There's a lot of fuss in the Indian media saying that now we have disproved it genetically. However, the only thing they've done is they said that there is a separate people called Indus Valley, and that Indus Valley has got 50 to 98% from some common link over here, and some 16% or so from Andamanese hunter-gatherers over here. And this common thing gave rise to hunter-gatherers, gave rise to Iranian herders, Iranian farmers, and so on and so forth. So in other words, these are all mathematical exercises. These are all based on models that academicians propose, and they fit the available data to these models, and they make some preposterous claims out there. So I caution people, when you see these papers, don't get carried away by the pedigree, saying that it came from Harvard or it came from some other big school and so on. It must be true. The facts are that the data is there, but then the models are all disputable. They encode various kinds of constraints that are preconceived based on their idea of history, based on their idea of linguistics, based on their idea of these things. They enforce that these models must be obeyed by the data, and that's why they converge to certain answers, and they make claims like this. So I don't buy this for a minute. I put it over here to show what is the state of art as far as these papers are concerned. So here is one more paper that came in 2019 that said that Zebu was there in Mitanni and Hittite lands in 2200 BCE. Why is that relevant? Because they found over here, this is a very famous Zebu, the humped bull. We see that in India all over the place, right? This is very, very drought resistant. This is an animal that is drought resistant in the Indian context. And all of a sudden, they found that the remains of these cattle were there in a certain strata in the soil. Over here, when they saw the years before present, 4,000 years before present, these cattle remains suddenly went up in the record. And when they did that, they found that these are all related to the Zebu cattle in 2200 BC. And how did they get that? So I'm claiming that when there was a drought in Indus Valley for almost 400-year drought, that's what caused the collapse of the Indus Valley civilization, right, around 2000 BCE, along with Saraswati drying up. So people migrated out of these lands and went to Euphrates and Tigris river valleys and other places, taking their most valuable possession, which is cattle. Cattle was a wealth of those days. And that is why all of a sudden you find these things, Zebu going up in this. And this is a paper in Science. And the same thing, they talked about how all of a sudden from Indus Valley civilization, the Bos Indicus, suddenly it went up. Akkadian seal also shows the same thing. So my rebuttal is not changed. So I'm saying that this is all mathematical studies. They fail to explain textual migration record, cattle migration record, and other such things. And I'm saying the results cannot be globalized. One cannot come with such strong claims like Tony Joseph is doing or like David Reich is doing. They have to say in the context of the data, methods we've taken, make a narrow claim. It's only in the context of these studies that I'm making a cautious claim that there appears to be a relationship. You cannot say I've addressed the issue of caste system. I know how caste system came. These people came from there and they've got Sanskrit. That's preposterous. Such things don't exist at the genetic level. Models are all imaginations that you have. So I completely reject some of these things. I'm saying that you cannot conclude a genetic flow in India following a postulated Indo-European language expansion. With much larger sample sizes, maybe we'll get better resolution on understanding our populations. Very last section, I'll finish this off. I'm showing cultural practices across time and geography showing similarity. B.B. Lal, he showed continuity of civilization. Our people are used to thinking there's a Harappa civilization, there's a Vedic civilization. However, B.B. Lal came in and said the archaeological record does not show that. He's saying there's a cultural continuity across from Harappan times to Vedic times. He presented the swastika, the sindoor symbol that many married women, even today in India, wear, the namaste symbol, the Shivalinga and Kalibangan, yoga asana positions. Many people are talking about these things. Here is one more, Birhana, a pottery shard from 4000 BCE. Does this look familiar to you compared to this? It's exactly the same, isn't it? So some people think this is Parvati. Some people say there's something else. But there appears to be a continuity across time from Birhana to Megar, showing that these things are there. We talked about some astronomy, but if you look at other celestial clocks, whether you look at the number of muhurtas, the nakshatra model, the solar model, the 6-year synchrony of lunar solar Adhika Masa, the 12-year Jupiter cycle, 30-year Saturn cycle, 60-year Samvatsara cycle. If you go to the Swami Malai temple in Tamil Nadu, near Kumbakonam, you'll find that at every step there is 1 year of the Tamil year. Okay, it's a 60-year cycle. And the funny thing is, each of those years have got Sanskrit names in there. The Samvatsara cycle, that refers to the combination of the Saturn-Jupiter cycle. Every 60 years, this goes through one's resonance. And our ancient Indians had observed that. That is a 60-year Samvatsara cycle. You find the 19-year moon cycle. I'm not going to talk about that. The TEDx talk I given, the talk, the story of Rohini, that's related to this. The Yuga models are common throughout India. Similarly, transits, conjunctions. This is an entire talk by itself to show some of these things. If you look at the regional calendars used in India, whether it's Amanta calendar or Purni Amanta calendar for lunisolar or these, you find that it's used in Malayalam calendar, Oriya, Tamil, Bengali, and Eastern calendars. All of them have got a very, very similar kind of regional calendar. If you look at the dresses, you find whether it is worship, epics, sciences, math, medicine, grammar, idiom, even the Sandhi rules that we have, whether it is in Sanskrit or Kannada, the Sandhi rules are all similar. You find a very similar grammar, you find a very similar kind of dress structure. The foods, you might trivially say these are different foods, but if you break it down into the constituents available, you'll say that there's a pan-Indian similarity. In music, you might say we have got Hindustani, we got Carnatic, but again, I have got an entire talk on history of music where I show there's a commonality going back to Samavedic times. There's commonality over there. Dance forms, you got commonality all over India. So my closing remarks, the story of India is vast, complex, and it is multidimensional. It is pretentious of me to come here and say I've got a narrative that talks about all of India. It might take years to even talk about some of these things. At a very high level, we examined the Dravidian claims and we concluded a lack of support for the claims. We presented a pan-Indian script deriving from Harappa and Brahmi. We questioned the received wisdom of Dravidian proof. We presented pan-Indian astronomy and showed antiquity. We questioned the utility of genetics in addressing identity. We presented various dimensions of cultural similarity. And I say that India is united by its ancient culture and its heritage, and its identity is that of the Dharmic civilization. The destruction of the Indian identity by the 5 malicious forces I talked about, that has to be contested and neutralized with evidence-based claims. If we have to go and say this is our identity as Indians, only that can solve some of the problems that we have today in the Indian context. That is the end of my talk. So thank you very much for, thank you.